Today on the 50-pound brain, we prepare for major organ transplant, but not on Higgins. Today, Vivian is our patient. So before we get started, we need to make sure we have all our equipment. Safety glasses, check. Steel-toed sandals, check. Artificial breeze, check. Jack stands, cherry picker, floor jack, check. Super torque, electric, cordless impact, check. Any bolts we can't get loose, we'll just twist off. All right, we got all our stuff. So let's get going. First thing we gotta do is pull the hood and get fluids draining. So what we're doing is we're changing this engine. I've got a new one coming from swengines.com, not a sponsor. And depending on how things go, we'll decide what kind of review I give them when this is all said and done. So far it's been okay. We'll see what condition the motor's in. But while we're also, or let me rephrase that, while we're changing the engine, we're also doing a bunch of other stuff, because there's a lot of OEM parts on this car that has been on there for, as far as I can tell, 211,000 miles. Struts, wheel bearings, the axles. I'm trying to think of what other stuff I've got on. Oh, I got tie rod ends for this. I've got a bunch of things that I want to change while the engine's out, because it's just super easy to do. So that's what we're going to do. When I did the rear wheel bearings and brakes, they were OEM. Well, I don't know about the brakes, but the wheel bearings were. So they're changed, and when this is done, pretty much everything on the underside will be changed. It'll just be a 2005 body with a 2023 driveline. And then I'm going to give it to my daughter and son-in-law down in San Antonio. So let's get going. So let me make a disclaimer here. I'm going to skip through the stuff that you can find somewhere else, like caliper removal and rotor removal and jazz like that. Stuff that's easy. Stuff that you find anywhere on the interwebs on how to do on a Mazda 3. We're going to get into the great courses version of this stuff. Masterclass, or whatever you want to equate it to. Struts, tie rod ends, axles, and ultimately engine and transmission coming out. So for the sake of brevity and to not be redundant on YouTube, we're going to cut out the simple stuff. So I'll come back when we're ready to start showing something new. Okay, we're getting into here to where we are getting ready to take the strut and steering knuckle out. We're going to kind of take them out as an assembly, only because we're changing wheel bearings on this as well. So the lower ball joint is held in with a clinch bolt, and I don't know if you can see the seam. I got my chisel sticking out of it right now. Take that bolt out and you drive a chisel in here enough to spread open these two jaws that grip the ball joint. But don't get a chisel that has such a shallow bevel that the blade is hitting the ball joint before you get a good spread on it, or you haven't accomplished anything. You can see this is barely in there, but if you look, it's loose. So the only thing I got left to do, this is loose. Well, I got it turned, so it's, but it's, if you see, I just pushed that with my thumb. The caliper is bolted on here just to keep it out of the way for a minute, but the brake line's off of it. The sway bar link is off of it. This is for the anti-lock brakes sensor. That's disconnected. So I got 3 bolts holding it up top. 1, 2, 3. Tie rods off. And then we can pretty much drop this thing out and pull it out, and then we can get the steering knuckle off, or yeah, the steering knuckle off, which is held on the same way as, let's see if I can do this without getting you seasick, held on the same way as the ball joint onto the bottom of the strut. And yeah, so we'll get that out in a minute. And then once you get everything loose, you just take this and pry it out of the knuckle with a big prying instrument, and you're loose. Wedge out of there. Actually, you know what? We're gonna leave this there for a second. Okay. Gotta get the axle out of here now. There we go. And this axle's had it because the boot's torn. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, you can see it. Okay. Who knows what else is going on in there, but we got a new axle for it, so it doesn't matter. Now, one thing we're going to do before we do any destruction of parts is check all our loot. We got all kinds of new stuff here from Rock Auto, not a sponsor. But we're going to check all our parts, make sure that they are in fact the right part. 99% of the time I get the right part, but every now and then there's something different, either because of a during year, model year production change, which happens quite often, and get the wrong part. Either if this is an early, in this case 05 car, and I get a late 05 like tie rod end, jazz like that. So we're gonna make sure everything's good to go before we go wrecking any parts. Okay, as I take a breather, let me bring you up to date. Struts are out, steering knuckles are out. I guess that's really about it. There's a lot of work to do just that. I guess what's interesting about this car so far, I didn't really notice before, is that it had two different struts in it. Now, if you've seen pictures, the passenger fender and door are white. I did that because the previous ones were in some kind of altercation, rattle can painted, and the fender liner was never put back in after whatever they hit. So the fender and door were rusting from the inside out. Now that makes sense that there would be, or well, it answers, to me, answers the question why there are two different struts in this car. Because I think the passenger side strut got messed up in whatever they hit, and so they just changed that strut because it was a different brand, different color, different everything from the driver's side one. So that's what's interesting or unusual about this job. Other than that, so far it's going okay. I'm gonna take the steering knuckles over to the bat cave where the press is and press the bearings out and press in the new ones. So I'll bring you along. I'm eating grapes off the fence over here because they are mighty tasty and free 90 free. That's the best kind of grapes, free grapes. Okay, we're gonna see how this goes. Make sure you have your safety glasses on. center this up a little better. Okay, here we go. Tell you what, when this thing lets loose, it's gonna make a nice pop. Get us a cheater bar, because I really don't want to be by this thing in case it lets loose. Wish I had a pressure gauge to show how much pressure we got on that bearing right now. There it goes. Hope that didn't scare you. Scared me. And there you have it. Here's the new unit. We're going to mash in there. Let's see how this goes. It's oily. Alright, so let me show you what's going on here. Our new bearing comes in from this direction. The other one's still on the press. This is the dry one. The first one we pressed that made the big nasty bang. So, and because this is such a complex shape, there's no good way to get something flat here to press on. So, until we get up into this area. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our old setup, hopefully, yeah, there we go. And we're going to push on this face, which is going to push the whole knuckle down onto our new hub and bearing assembly. At least that's the theory. We'll see if it works. Now the other thing we have to do is we have to support it here in the center instead of on these lugs, because it'll just push these lugs out of the flange probably. So we want our transfer of force to come through here, not these, because these are just pressed in. And yeah, I don't want to push them back out. So we got to find something to go under there. Okay, here's our whole kludgy setup. Yes sirree. Probably be an eye patch in my future. Can only go as pirate for Halloween then with Lucy. Oh well, we'll see. See how this goes. Oh, look at that, like butter. It's getting very tight now, all of a sudden. All right, let's see what's going on. Oh, okay. So those flanges are hitting each other. Okay, that's cool. I'm glad we didn't force it. We can go to this one now. Be mo better good. And we're seated. And it even still turns. What a bargain. One down, one to go. Okay, so here we are. New engine, or new to us engine. Old engine still in the car. We got a little bit of rain today, unfortunately, so our rotor's rusted over. But and yeah, I've left this mess out. There's our new steering knuckles, or not new steering knuckles, but the new bearings in our steering knuckles. You may say, why are you leaving all that stuff out? Well, you know what? It's going to be in the weather when it's on the car, so it's not a big deal. But yeah, we're going to get this thing together and get it on out of here. Here's our old parts so far. There's the old flywheel. Pressure plate came with the engine. The engine came from Clearwater, Florida, and it shows. There's our two different struts came off the car. And so yeah, we just get some time and we'll have this heart swapped out in no time. Okay, it's Friday morning. Here's where we're sitting. Let me give you a tour, because I got a lot of work to do. The videos kind of take time from that. So here's our new to us engine. Slowly stripping off all the chopped off parts like radiator hoses and stuff like that the salvage yard chopped off before they stuck the motor on the shelf. Here's our existing engine, and what we're going to do is we're going to pull this motor out and put this motor in just like the factory did, pre-wired. Because there's the old harness that came from the salvage yard, and it for the most part would have worked just fine, but there are a few things that were chopped off, either just were ripped off, or yeah, just nobody cared. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that harness once we get this engine out and put it on this engine so that everything's already wired. It's so much easier to route when it's hanging like this. Now the other things that have to happen before this goes in, we're going to change the rear main seal, which is going to be a little bit of a debacle because the oil pan has to come loose to do that because it has a mating surface. We're going to change the front main seal behind here, and that's a whole nother involved process because there's no key on this harmonic balancer. Once you loosen this bolt, this baby's free to spin because it's a wedge mate fit, I do believe. I'll confirm it once I get in there. But the other thing with this is once this bolt is loose, there's no key in the timing chain sprocket either. The only thing that keeps this engine in time is the clamp between the balancer and the snout of the crank that smashes that sprocket that runs the camshaft. So you have to put this thing at top dead center before you loosen this bolt, and you have to have the holding tool, the timing tools in to hold the camshaft still. This bolt is your top dead center set bolt for this, so that everything bolts back together in time before you crank this, because this is a torque to yield bolt. You crank it down super tight and then walk away, and if it's not in time, I guess these motors will bend valves. I wasn't aware that Mazda did that. They used to not. 626s and stuff had non-interference engines, but I guess that's changed. So it's a big to-do to make sure this thing's in time before you tighten this down and go and crank it over and then wreck your engine. So that has to happen. Once those two things happen, we'll bolt the transmission onto this and throw her back in. Probably won't happen till tomorrow. Hopefully, if I get that one out soon, Get this out, get the transmission separated from the engine, and get the rear main seal on this one. Put the flywheel on, put the clutch on, and then put the transmission on. So if I get done today, if I get done today and get this thing to where it's ready to go in tomorrow, this thing can be in the car tomorrow. And then it won't be too bad. I theoretically could be driving it by Monday. So that's where we are. Okay, now one thing I did want you to see, like I said, I would do things that are different, not something you could find elsewhere on YouTube, is getting these shifter cable ball joints loose. There's two different styles. This one doesn't have the clips. There's another style has the clips around here. You kind of pop up and these come out, but these don't, so you just have to get under them and pop them off. So I wasn't sure how they came apart. I'd never dealt with this style. I always had the clip ones before. But yeah, so if you're doing this, don't be afraid. Just make it so. All right, engine's out. And it's nasty. I just pressure washed the transmission, so it'll be nice and purty when it goes back in. Now I just gotta wait for it to dry, but I got other things to do in the meantime. I gotta pull this harness off. I gotta pull accessories off, like the alternator. Actually, that's the only accessory really has to come off, it's the alternator. Everything else I have. New water pump's coming. Tensioner. It has a tensioner. I might get a new pulley for it, just because, even though that one runs pretty smooth. I'll see if I have one. I might have one in my stash of trash. So, but yeah, still plenty of things to do while this dries. Pressure wash the back of the engine bay, so it's gonna be a clean machine. To the fan, drying it out. Luckily we're in Utah. Once the sun really gets cooking, this will dry in a few minutes, and then we'll be, hopefully by this evening this will be ready to go back in, if I get all my other tasks done. Stuck this axle back in just to be a water plug when I was pressure washing it. If you take this big snap ring off right here, it goes in and out pretty easy. But yeah, it's only a ring in here that retains it in the car. Well, it can't really go anywhere once it's in the steering knuckle. But yeah, they make these things to be built, to be assembled quickly. And just so you know, this is how Mazda really assembles their cars. Behind the corporate office on a slab with a cherry picker and jack stands. That whole assembly line stuff, that's just PR. It's all simulated. Some will say like the moon landings were. The moon landings were real. I hope you can see. This is what our clutch pilot bearing did when we pulled the transmission out. It completely self-destructed and collapsed. I hope you can see that the needle's just all laying in the bottom there. So, no idea that this thing was in this condition driving the car. Drove fantastic. Didn't make any noise. So, kudos to whoever made that bearing. There's all kinds of shavings inside this bell housing. I mean, some of it's old age clutch material, but it's a little distressing that that pilot bearing is in such bad shape. I hope, I think the transmission shaft will be okay though. So we'll see. Drove fine. Okay, put the new rear main seal on, greased up the pilot bearing for the transmission, because this one in here was still good. It hadn't self-destructed like the other one, but we made sure we mashed a bunch of grease into it since I didn't have a new one. I don't have a bearing puller, one of the few things I don't have. We're getting ready to put this flywheel on, then we can put the clutch pack on. And then we're just waiting for our tools from the Jungle website to change this front main seal. We don't need tools to change the front main seal, but we need tools to retime the timing chain, because once you take that harmonic balancer loose, the engine could be out of time if the crank moves. So got to make sure everything's held in place while we do the seal. So that's where we are.